Hello, this is Jessi Sletten from Empowering Postpartum. Welcome to the Spanglish World Networks on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores on iOS and Android devices. And while you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is totally free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. We are back this week for another amazing episode of Empowering Postpartum with me, Jessi Sletten, your postpartum empowerment coach, helping you feel confident, prepared, and holistically supported for your unique journey into parenthood. And I am honored to introduce my guest this week, parent coach Rose Clark from Love the Way You Parent. We are going to be talking about the importance of confronting our childhood trauma in order to heal and grow into the parents we long to be for our own children. So good morning, Rose. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jessi.
Yes. So why don't we start off with you just introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start off with just a little bit of a backstory. So I'm a 47-year-old mom. I live in Ottawa, Canada, and I have 2 children. And before I got married, I chatted with my husband about, what kind of parenting I wanted to do, what kind of parents I wanted to be, because I had a difficult childhood. I had a childhood I didn't particularly like. I didn't like the way that I was treated. And I really wanted to make sure things were different for my kids. And so what I said to my husband was, I want us to be able to raise our kids in a way that they get to be their own person. They get to have their own thoughts and feelings and opinions. And it's okay if those are different than ours, And I also wanted our kids to have a close emotional attachment with both their parents. So he was 100% on board. I was happy about that. We had our first baby and things seemed to be going really well. For me, I really felt like, look, I'm giving my all to my baby. We were doing like a lot of attachment parenting. I was just fully there for her. And that was great. And then I had another baby before my first child turned 2. And that for me was when really things got really, really hard, because we only have 100% to give. And I was already giving 100% to this one baby. I didn't have 200%. I didn't have another 100% to give, this new baby. And so that started to be very, very difficult for me. There was a lot of frustration. And that's when I feel like a lot of my triggers from childhood, started to come up. I started yelling. I felt like all my unshed tears and my unexpressed anger from an abusive childhood started pouring out on my babies. And I didn't know what to do, because I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I had it all figured out. And really looking back now, I see what happened was, the pendulum really swung for me from like what I experienced. I wanted things to be 100% opposite for my kids. But what really happened there was like, I took my survival mechanism from childhood, which was to erase myself, to erase my identity, and hand it all the way over. Right. And so it really was the same survival mechanism. I thought I was using it for something good. I thought that that's the way things should be. And boy, was I wrong, because we don't need the pendulum to swing completely in the other direction. We need it to really hang in the middle. And so I knew I needed tools. That's what I said to my husband. I said, I have the ideas in my head of the way I want things to be, but I really needed the tools. And so I started looking. I started reading all the books and all the blog posts. Nothing was really sticking until I found language of listening. And this is a parenting model that really allowed me to dive into that first idea of like letting my kids be who they are. It's all about pushing the child's strengths to the surface, but then also being able to hold boundaries in ways that I felt really good about, and the ways that left my kids feeling good about themselves too. And this was really important for me, because I really felt the way boundaries were held in my childhood was not a happy way to hold boundaries, right? Not a healthy way. And the thing that really, really struck me was I did jump in to get the training to become a parenting coach, but like, it was the one piece of the training. So it's a 2-year training. It was the very last part of the training where she started to teach us how to use these parenting tools with ourselves. That's when things really started to change for me, because I was able to reparent myself. I was able to start treating myself the way that I should have been treated in my childhood. And that's what really started to bring the healing about for me.
I love that so much. The concept of reparenting yourself was so foreign to me when I became a parent. I was like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. But then the more and more I got into it, I was like, oh, wow. Like, it is incredible how maybe these things have been simmering under the surface for a long time. And then until we kind of make this transition into parenthood, that's when they start coming out, becoming more aware of it. And you're seeing these triggers. And it's so true that, we can take these courses on how to help others, but until we can apply those to ourselves and really heal our own inner wounds and figure out, okay, this is how I need to heal and reparent myself so that I can parent my children in the way that I want to. If we don't have that piece, it's going to be very difficult to move forward in the way we want to in our parenthood.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's amazing. It's so funny because I think so much of what we do in this field, like, is influenced by our own experiences in parenthood, right? And so same
100%.
thing
Yes.
with me as well. The traumatic postpartum experience I had with my first son really shaped what I do now and the work that I do. But I love how both of us had to go through this healing process for ourselves before we really could dive in to this work, right? But it's a continual process. For sure.
Yes, it
I'm
is. Yes, it is. Yeah.
never done, right? Like, just like trauma, like, it might never go away, but we're continuously healing it. We're continuously, figuring out ways that we can move forward. But I love this idea of what you mentioned for the language of listening. So I'd love if we could kind of start diving into maybe some of those tools that you learned so that we can maybe take some of those and start applying it to our own healing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, let's just start where I like to start with people. And
Yeah.
where we start is really, let me put it this way. What I consider to be the biggest wounds when we have, childhood trauma is really this lack of self-trust. We don't
Mm,
trust ourselves. We don't have this deep trust in who we are.
yeah.
And also we've lost access to our identity. We've lost
Mm,
access to our authentic selves. And so there's this really simple activity that, people listening today can do if they just want to sit down and get 20 to 30 minutes on their own and just write out 2 lists. I want them to write out a list of everything they can think of that they like and everything that they can think of that they dislike. This is a deep connection, very simple, but very, very deep connection to our identity because nobody has a list like you, right? Your
mhm,
preferences are actually so incredibly important. And what happens, especially in an abusive childhood, or really for any of us that were raised in the reward and punishment model, what
mm,
ends up happening is we do start to lose that connection to our identity. We start to lose our connection to our likes and dislikes, our preferences, and our brain gets really focused on the preferences of our caregivers, of our parents.
mm,
And so then we start building our life around someone else's identity, not our
mhm,
own, And so it's so, so important for us to get that connection back. And then once you have your likes and dislikes, well, those are actually your boundaries. And no
mm.
one can argue with your boundaries. There's no arguing. You either like a thing or you don't like a thing. My example I always like to use is red licorice because that was the first thing I put on my list when I started writing out my list. I love red
Yeah.
licorice. I just think it's just like the delicious, the most delicious candy. And
Mhm,
but like somebody can't tell me that licorice is disgusting. I can
mm,
accept that it's disgusting for them. I can accept if
right,
they don't like it, but like they're
right.
not going to tell me that it's not delicious because it just is. That's my reality.
Mhm,
And so when we can start looking at our boundaries in this way, it starts to again connect us to our identity in a very, very deep way, but it also
mhm.
helps us to start to get really healthy. And maybe this is a great time actually for me to share how it helped with my marriage. Like, where we're talking
Yeah,
about childhood trauma, we don't bring that just into our parenting. We bring that into generally all aspects of our adult lives, because
yes.
we come up with these amazing strategies. They're really survival strategies in childhood. They're usually genius. Kids are so good at coming up with the things that they need, you
Yeah.
know? And so one of the strategies that I came up with in my childhood was to get really, really good at recognizing micro facial expressions. Because then I
Mm,
could read my mom's face, and I could tell that when she was getting upset, and then I could completely erase myself,
mhm,
right? Change my behavior so that I could protect myself from being abused, literally. And
mhm.
so I brought that survival strategy into my marriage. And so whenever my husband's face would do this thing, the same thing that my mom's face did, really it was in the lips, I would start to get
Mhm,
really defensive and pick a fight with him.
mhm.
And one day that broke. One day that stopped because he came home from work and he was talking about something that he didn't like at work. right? And there's that language again, that like and dislike, right? And
Yeah.
how it is. He was talking about something he didn't like. I started to get defensive. I started to pick a fight with him, but then I remembered, wait, he just doesn't like that. And that's just part of his identity. And it has nothing to do with me because I have my own likes and dislikes over here.
Right.
And in that moment, enmeshment just fell away from our marriage. Like it was just such an amazing time to be able to fully accept myself.
Yeah.
Because I could do that in the language of my likes and dislikes, and fully accept who he was. And it was also helping me fully accept my children, understand their behavior. Well, they just don't like this or they like this, right? And so that idea of like letting everybody have their own separate identity and removing enmeshment from those relationships was really a huge step in my healing. So that's kind of the starting place. That's a language of listening activity. Now maybe we can move into the tools.
I love it. Yes. We're on a roll.
Sounds...
This is so good. I'm like, let me take some notes.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So I love the way, again, that this model is set up, because it's set up in such a way that it really does start to change the wiring in our brain. This is what we need. When we've had childhood experiences, they wire our brain in a very powerful way because we're kids. And then, like I said, a lot of those beliefs, a lot of those survival mechanisms we bring into our adulthood, and they start to trip us up because we're not in that situation anymore. Right. And so this model, what it gives us is it gives us new beliefs. They call them premises. They give us new beliefs to believe, and we can believe them about our kids and we can believe them about ourselves. There's that reparenting part, right? And those premises are there, but attached to each of the premises is a tool. So there's 3 premises that have a tool attached to them. So I'll just maybe go through each of them and talk about how to apply them to our kids and how to apply them to ourselves at the same time. That's good. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So the first premise, I'll say it what it sounds like for kids and what the tool is, and then I'll relay to how we can use it with ourselves. So the first premise says that everything children do and say is communication, and they must continue to communicate until they are heard. So that way we don't need to judge their behavior. We don't need to think it means anything about us. Like, I'm a bad parent, my kid's going to become a bully. All these future thoughts that kind of come into our head when we see our kids behaving in ways we don't like. Here's that language again about liking and dislike. And so the tool that we use in that moment is called say what you see. It's validation. We've heard a lot about validation, I think, out in the world, validate kids' emotions, be there with them. With language of listening, it's slightly different because we really make sure the validation starts with the word you. We really make it about the child. And it really helps us to understand. The point is that we understand, where we can go, oh, this is why she hit her sister. Right? This is why she threw the toy, or whatever is in there, right? So that we can kind of walk around inside their head, walk around inside their world, because that really helps us, I think, settle down. Again, remove a lot of those judgments and different things. Okay. And so the same thing applies to us. Everything we do and say is communication. And we must continue to communicate until we are heard. Let's talk about that last part a little bit for moms. Sometimes we're doing things over and over again we don't like. That was really my experience when my kids were really young. I just kept doing these things that I didn't just have mom guilt. I had mom regret. Like, I was regretting the things that I did at the end of the day. You know what I'm talking about, right? You walk into your kid's bedroom, they're asleep in their crib or their toddler bed or whatever, and you're like, what did I have to yell about? They're just what was I doing? What was I thinking? How did all these, these things come over and take control of me? That's how I felt, and then I'd stay awake all night ruminating about it and getting terrible sleep, which we all know this is something that moms need, especially when the kids, right? That postpartum term, we really, really need to get as much sleep as we possibly can, right? But these things can really increase our anxiety and all those things. And so that idea of starting to understand ourselves and say, everything I do and say is communication, and I must continue to communicate until I'm heard. And it's very difficult for us to maybe get that outside validation. And so with language of listening, you use the tools with yourself. So what I'll get a mom to do is, if it's safe for you to remove yourself from a situation and your kids, maybe your kids are freaking out or whatever, and you're freaking out and you're like, okay, that's not what I want to do. Get into the bathroom, close the door, look at yourself in the mirror, and you say what you see with yourself. You speak to yourself using the word you, and just talk about how you're feeling. You're so mad right now. You asked them 10 times to put their shoes on. It's past time to go. We're going to be late. You're so upset and frustrated, right? Just validate yourself. Because I think a really important thing for people to know is that when it's okay to have a problem, that's when it's okay to go ahead and solve the problem. So we get caught up judging ourselves. I'm not a good enough mom. I didn't stay patient. But it's okay to get frustrated. It's just a message. you want to give your best
Yes.
self to your kids. You want to be able to show up for them as best you can. And frustration doesn't always
Right.
help with that situation, right? I mean, it helps if you can move it through, if you can get the message and move it through, right? But if it's constantly showing up and we're stuffing it, like we probably are, because that's, another one of those survival mechanisms, stuffing our own emotions, right? I can't trust my emotions. So yeah, so that's the first tool and the first premise and kind of how they.
I love that.
Work.
Yeah. Well,
or do you want
to mention, like, I love that validation piece. We can give ourselves permission to be that validation for ourselves, because a lot of times when we get to those heightened emotional states, it's because we are probably burnt out, right? We've probably hit our max for the day, or something else is going on, and we probably don't have our partner there, right? And so we don't have that tag team ability to be like, okay, I need a moment. Can you take over, please? Sometimes that's just not available, right? Or for single parents, like, that's not available for them ever, right? And so that's very difficult. And so we have to empower ourselves to give ourselves permission to say, okay, I can validate myself. I can take a moment. It's okay to walk away if they're safe, go into the bathroom, and then give ourselves that validation is so powerful, because I feel like so many times we feel like we can't do that, or we don't even think of that as an option. We're just like, well, I'm here alone. I'm holding down the fort. I'm a default parent again, and I have nobody to help, help me regulate, right? I don't have this co-regulation ability with a partner right now. And I'm the only one who's the adult in the situation, and I have to regulate my children, right? And so it just seems so overwhelming. But giving ourselves that permission for just a brief moment to go get that validation that we need for ourselves, I think is so powerful. So I love that first tool. This is gold.
Good. Yeah. And I'll just point out too that, in those really stressful situations, what happens? Those survival mechanisms from our childhood show up, right? And they're probably not the thing that we need when we're parenting our children. Something we needed in childhood, right, to protect ourselves and get through, but probably not what we need now, right? So that idea of erasing ourselves, or however it shows up for people. Yeah. So the next premise I like to talk about talks about needs. And it says, let's bring up the one. I'll download the one from my brain for kids first, which says, all behaviors, parents and children, but by 3 healthy needs: experience, connection, and power. And what children are already doing is they're already, right? And so what this allows us to do, this really supports the say what you see as well, actually. So it says that all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs. That means all behaviors are driven by healthy needs, but they're not always healthy, right? Or the way we say it in language of listening is not all behaviors are behaviors you like. There's your boundaries showing up again, right? But it still gives us that ability to look at our kids as like, oh, they're just meeting a need. This is just a normal, natural human behavior. They're trying to get a need met. It falls outside of my boundaries. And so what do? We have the can-dos tool in language of listening, which is letting the kids know what they can do to meet the need. So in our brain, we use say what you see to try to figure out what this need is, really. And that's why that piece of like dropping the judgment, right? Being able to walk around in their head allows you to really see like, oh, they're just meeting a need.
Right? Get curious instead of judgmental.
100%. And so, and when you can identify those needs, again, it's just 3: experience, connection, and power. I'll speak about what they are in just one second, more specifically, but it really allows us to take what the child is doing, or take that need that we can see, and just redirect them, right? Show them, here's what you can do to meet that need over here. But it really does need to be almost like there's a bit of back and forth that we encourage here. We actually will usually use the phrase with kids like, okay, let me just pull out a situation here. The one I usually like to use is, let's say, you got 2 little boys, one of them is playing with a car, and the brother hits, the other one that has a car because he wants a turn.
Yes.
He just wants a turn with the car, right? So again, we've been taught, because society is terrible at giving us the right thoughts, helpful thoughts to think about our kids and think about ourselves, to be honest, right? They give us very unhelpful thoughts, and then we jump in and we try it. We think our child is a terrible person. They're going to be a bully at school, blah, blah. No, simply the kid just wants a turn with the car. Totally normal, natural thing. We all have things we want, right? So then in order, like, well, what works better than, putting the kid on timeout or whatever, is to jump in and give them the life skills. Actually, here's how you can get what you want, without anybody getting hurt, right? A way that's going to be personally beneficial and socially beneficial. So they have a good relationship, know what to do next time. That's really kind of the way that functions. So, the say what you see would sound like, you hit your brother, you want to turn with the car, must be something you can do to let him know you want to turn without anybody getting hurt.
Right. Yep.
It's really, really that simple.
Yep.
And then the child can give examples, and do those examples of what they could do fall into your boundaries or not? And maybe the child has no other idea.
Right.
And so you can start to give some ideas like, let's set a timer, because what we want is we want the meeting of the need. We want both parent and child to like the solution, the meeting of the need. So the parent likes it because it falls inside their boundaries. The child likes it because it actually meets the need. It actually feels satisfying for them.
And
so then
I was just going to say, and that reminds me of that little trigger that you said about power, because so often they have no control of their life, right? And so any little bit of control we can give them to feel like they can make decisions.
Yeah.
I love that idea of like including them in. It's a more collaborative process of problem solving, right? And so it's not only modeling that behavior for them, but it's also allowing them to feel empowered to be a part of the solution. And I really love that. And of course, it's hard in the moment because you might be triggered. You might have those like, you just chucked the car across the room and almost hit the TV or whatever, might have happened. So that's that piece of stepping back, validate your own feelings, and then stepping in, right? And making sure you're regulated enough to engage in what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're important too, right? There's that whole thing of like, don't erase yourself. It's okay for you to be angry and frustrated. There's nothing wrong with that. And you still want to have full choice over the way that you handle this situation, because you gain the life skills, so it stops happening, right?
Right, exactly. You don't want to have to keep repeating this every single day for the rest of your life.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is going to stop if you do give them the life skills, if you do show them how to meet their needs, inside your boundaries and in a way that feels satisfying for them. And Jessi, you just reminded me that I didn't dive deeper into what the needs actually
you're good.
mean.
Yeah. Let's do that now. Yeah.
So the need for experience is really about like, I've got this body, I've got this life. What can I do with it? During the pandemic, I was actually living in Nova Scotia, Canada, and the rules were harsh. We were shut down.
Yes.
And my kids, they just really couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't go to the library. You'd even get fined if you went for a walk in the park through the woods. You'd get a fine. Like, they were serious,
outdoors,
right? So we were really stuck. Outdoors. It was crazy. $1,000 fine. $1,000. So
that's crazy.
My kids started meeting their need for experience. It really is. My kids started meeting their need for experience inside our home. So I was finding my jewelry in bits and pieces all over the place. I was finding shampoo smeared on the bathroom wall. And I'm like, okay, they're meeting their need for experience, but I need them, right, to meet their needs somewhere else. Because kids really, experience can show up a lot as like experimentation. Right. And that kind of like exploring and experimenting. Right. And so just recognizing that, and so it really helped me, solve the actual problem, find them other things to do. So they felt stimulated, even though we were so, locked down. And the second need is connection, which is pretty, I think, obvious to people. Sometimes it's, verbal connection. Sometimes it's physical connection. That's so important. And then the need for power is really, really about feeling capable. More than anything, it's about feeling capable. And so, yes, like you said, having some control. Nobody has to have 100% control, because we just don't. It's just the way that I can't control the weather. Like, we can't have control over everything, but to feel capable, to feel like we have something to offer the world or our family, that's so important. So let's talk about how this applies to moms. Okay. So, and the reparenting piece, right? So all of your behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs. This is huge for moms. Sometimes moms just really have that ability to relax, where they go, whatever I'm doing, I'm just trying to meet a need. And if I don't like the way I'm meeting my need, I can figure out what need that is and just find a way to meet it that I do like. Right. So if you're feeling powerless when your kids are not doing what you say, right, you can stop, validate, find a can do that works for you. Right. That actually, like, you connect with your authentic self. This is what you're doing really when you're aware of your likes and dislikes. You do the self-validation, you're connecting with your authentic self, and you're making that the most important. And I think that's too, like what I was talking about when I talked about how in our childhood, we'll set aside our likes and dislikes and our access to them, and we'll really pay attention to, our caregivers' likes and dislikes. Really, our likes and dislikes need to be the most important for us in our lives. And when ours are the most important for us in our lives, then we're totally okay with everybody else's preferences being the most important for them. And people are like, well, then I'm going to get selfish and everybody's going to be selfish. Actually, no, because caring about people and the people you care about are on your list. right? And so you're not going to become
Right.
selfish. Actually, those people are so important to you, and you're more freed up to show
Right.
them love and to care for them and to, give them what they need or support them to, to get what they
Yeah.
need. So there's no
Yeah, I
selfishness
love that. I
happening
talk about
there.
this all the time where, I think we're primed through society and so many other things that, we have to be this martyr to our motherhood, right? Like we have to sacrifice everything down to who we are, our identity, everything for our children, right? And so we have this idea in our mind that we're not a good parent if, we aren't putting our all in and we just kind of put ourselves to the side, our ambitions, our likes, our dislikes, all those things to the side because our children should be everything, right? And we should be that should be our driving factor. And I feel like that connects so perfectly into what you're saying where, we had our childhood experience where our caregivers likes and dislikes were, our driving factor. And then when we become a parent, that's all of a sudden replaced with our children's, I feel like in some ways. So we're like, okay, we have to put aside what we want, our boundaries, because our children is more important. What they like or dislike or their boundaries are more important than our own. And I feel like that's where a lot of these issues come in with feeling the guilt, feeling the, rage or, dissatisfaction with our motherhood because we're not feeding ourselves. We're not, nurturing our own identity, nurturing our own likes and dislikes. So yeah,
Yeah. And then it's setting the example for our
exactly.
kids that's who they
That
need to become,
generational
is to set
trauma,
us up.
right? Like, it's just
Yep.
reproducing
All part of it.
it. Yeah.
You got it. You got it. So to find ways, because Jessi, if we do look
Mhm.
after ourselves, that's actually when we can
Yes.
give our best selves to our children. So if that's on your likes list, right, of wanting to give your best self to
Yes.
your children, then it can't come when you
Right.
erase yourself. It
Right.
doesn't work, right? Like, and so yeah, so important. All right, we'll jump into the
Absolutely.
last premise and the
Let's
last
do
tool. Okay.
it.
All right. So the last premise says that children have every possible inner strength and they act according to who they believe they are.
Mm,
This is powerful. This is probably my favorite
yeah.
one because actually you can get your child to shift their behavior when you shift what they believe
Mm,
about themselves. And that's
yes.
huge, right? And everything's possible for them. Every strength is possible for them. We just need to show it to
Mm,
them first. That's really what we need to do. So in language of listening, we have this tool called the strengths tool. And the strengths tool is all about, naming the child's strength, really seeing the strength and naming the strength so that it starts to wire the child's brain so that
yeah.
they believe that about themselves. Really, it gives them
Mm,
self-talk. I had this client and she came to me one day after learning the strengths tool and she was so excited because her daughter came to her and she just used the exact same
mm,
wording that I had taught this mom to use. But this is my
mhm.
favorite part, hey, is when the kids start using this language too. Like we really see that the kids take this
Yeah.
stuff in, and it really does, it changes their self-talk. So this little girl comes into her mom and she says, Mommy, I just cleaned my desk. That's to say what you see,
Mhm.
by the way. I just cleaned my desk. That shows I'm responsible.
Oh, love it.
Like this is what this little
It's
girl is thinking
amazing.
about
Yes.
herself because her mom was speaking that way to
Mhm.
her. And so the strengths tool, it's kind of magical. And I have to say, I want to talk about really the difference between using a strengths tool from language of listening and using
Okay.
praise. So for me, my parents didn't really praise me. I just got a crap ton of
Mhm.
criticism, like it was always what I was doing wrong. And so, and I think a lot of us
Mm,
experience that, right? And so what do we want for our kids? We want to encourage our kids. We want to praise our kids. We want to help them feel good
right.
about themselves. So there's this real drive, this real beautiful want and desire behind using praise with our kids. The tricky part is that when we praise our kids, and that what I'm talking about is saying, good girl, good boy, I'm so proud of you, making about what you see and think about
Mm,
the child, it really makes their identity, their strengths, their goodness rooted in other people's
yes.
opinions instead of in the proof of who
Mhm.
they are. This is why it's so important when that little girl said, I cleaned my desk, right? That's the proof that she was responsible. Not that her mom says she's
Right.
responsible, not that somebody else would say that she's responsible, but she knows that she knows inside of herself that she cleaned her desk. And that's just one piece of proof that she's
Yes.
responsible. And what I love about this tool is how much it does inform who the child, like it teaches the kid how to think about
Yes.
themselves. It really does teach them how to view themselves and think about themselves. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I've had a few magical moments where when I've used these tools with my kids, their behavior, it changed for the good. It was just that one using the strengths tool for them. And I'll tell a little story that I like to share, which is about Sharpie markers. So I have dislikes. Okay. This is going to be a great story because it's going to lay out a lot of the pieces. Okay. But I have a dislike of having Sharpie marker on my furniture, on my walls. Right. And so then I have boundaries. My boundaries are that if a child finds a Sharpie marker, they must bring it to an adult. That's simply it. I had another boundary too of like Sharpie markers are only for paper, but kind of the basic one was if a child finds a Sharpie marker, they bring it to an adult. So I was in the dining room with my daughter. She was about maybe 4 or 5 years old. And she peeked behind the cabinet and she saw a Sharpie marker back there. And so she reached down and she grabbed it and she pulled it out. And she has a big smile on her face. And she's walking towards me holding the Sharpie marker out. Big smile, And then she changes her mind at the last minute. Nope. And she grabs it, holds that Sharpie marker against her chest. And she's looking at me with this look, and I'm like, oh my goodness, and so then my brain starts to go into that place where our brains go, right? As parents, we start to feel powerless. And I'm thinking like, what do I do? Oh no, she's got that marker. What's she going to do with it? Right? Like, do I send her to her room? I'm bigger than her. I'm stronger. I could grab it out of her hand. What do I do? And then I went, hang on, Rose, I'm listening. Use the tool, and so I did say what you see. And I said, you found a Sharpie marker and you started bringing it to me. That's it. I didn't say that, you gave me a dirty look and you refused to give it to me. I just kind of kept it very objective and very loose. Like you found a Sharpie marker and you started bringing it to me. And this is an interesting strength because it's a hidden strength, right? This is not so obvious, right? But what I said to her in that moment was, that shows how to follow the rules. She wasn't following the rules quite in that moment, but she did know how. It was showing me she didn't know how. The minute those words came out of my mouth, the smile came back, the hand came off the marker, it got handed back to me. And I was like,
what just happened?
That was so easy. Like, magic. I was floored, right? Like it was like magic. It totally was. And so, but it wasn't just that happened, Jessi. What happened from then on is she wanted to keep on experiencing herself as someone who knew how to follow the rules. And so she started looking for Sharpie markers and bringing them to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, this tool is like amazing because it's really what happens is kids start looking for opportunities to prove to themselves that they have those strengths. They can feel them and experience them and feel good about themselves, right? Build that self-confidence. And this is the kind of tool that gives an unshakable confidence to kids. Like my kids, when they're on the school ground and they're getting, if they get teased by other kids or whatever, just rolls right off their backs because they know who they are. They're not dependent. Their safety, their feelings about themselves, not dependent on other people's opinions. So it's
amazing. That's beautiful. That's what we all hope for our children, right? Because it's so prevalent out there, all of the social media, all of the pressures to be just like everyone else or to fit into this, unrealistic idea of who you should be. And so having that be this internally, driven gift that we can help create in our children is another thing that helps empower us as parents too. So I just love this. I'm like eating up every word you're saying, Rose.
Well, it's crazy how simple the tools are, really, right? Like you can hear how easy they are, right? But they go so deep into like who your child is and who you are. So it's just absolutely amazing. Let's talk about how moms can use this tool. Okay. So not everything. Sorry, that's the other premise. You have every possible inner strength. So you can know that about yourself. Like it's possible for you to experience yourself as having any strength that exists. And you behave according to who you believe you are. And so we can get some really crummy beliefs about ourselves from our childhood. And like I always tell people, if I talk about the abusive things that I experienced, it was really the mental and the emotional abuse that was the most terrible. Like I was physically abused, but it felt like the physical abuse just kind of confirmed the mental and the emotional stuff. Like it was really, I did not like the way that I thought about myself after childhood. And again, that idea of like not trusting myself, not having access to my authentic self. So when we can go into the bathroom, close the door, self-coach, right? When we can go in there and we can look at ourselves and we can validate ourselves, one of the things that is really, really important is actually to acknowledge to yourself what it is that you want. What do you want in that moment? So if we go back to the example that I gave, which was like, you want your kids to like listen the first time you ask, when you ask them to put their shoes on, right? When it's time to go out the door, like there's a lot of good things about wanting them to listen the first time they're asked. And actually that want shows strengths that you have. And so when you can look at yourself in the mirror, validate how you're feeling, figure out what you want, and then start naming the strengths that that want shows. So like just wanting them to get out of the door on time, like, well, that just shows that you're a person who wants to be on time. And that shows that you're a person who wants children that can hear a request and respond appropriately to it. That kind of an idea. And even kids who are on time, you're a great mom. You're a responsible mom because you want your kids to learn how to be on time. You want them to learn that skill as well, right? Those are all strengths you have. And then when you recognize, like, I have all these strengths because I have this want, that's when it comes super easy to come up with can-dos. That's when you really connected with yourself. And I have to tell you, like, being able to use these tools with myself and reconnect to validating myself and seeing the strengths that I have and knowing what I want, right? That was so healing for me after my childhood. After losing that connection to my self-trust, right? I mean, just being able to see what strengths it shows I have because I want my kids to get their shoes on the first time right? Like, I can really start to grow my own confidence. I can start to grow an unshakable confidence inside of myself, separate to whatever my parents think or thought about me. And I will acknowledge that my parents did the very best they could with what they had. They were really struggling, mentally and emotionally themselves. And so they were doing the best with what they had. And it was during a time when, there weren't all these resources available and all those things. But man, it meets my need for power. When I can show up in this way for myself and for my kids, and know that things are so different for me and when they're so different for me. And again, we talked about this, right? This idea of, like, you got to get it for yourself first before you can give it to your kids. And this is why, it was once I learned how to use the tools with myself that things really changed for me in my motherhood. That really allowed me to become the kind of mom I wanted to be. Having the tools was great. I knew I needed good tools that would work, but I really had to be able to use them with myself in order to be able to heal and to move on. And that was, like I say, huge.
Yes, I love that so much. And I think that, even for folks who are expecting right now, right? Maybe they haven't gone through their birth or haven't had previous children. I think that this still is so powerful, and we can start those skills now, right? Because we can come up with these likes and dislikes lists now. And so we can start realizing those and connecting with our boundaries and what those really mean, because I think boundaries became such a buzzword for out there, and a lot of misconceptions around what an actual boundary is. And it's not necessarily you're hoping to change other people's behavior, but it's really understanding, that inner boundary and that inner like and dislike, and, not, it doesn't matter if they are changing their behavior, right? Because it's what's inside for you, right? And so I do think that these can totally be done now in pregnancy, or even before you, maybe you're planning for a family right now, right? You're going through your fertility journey. And so it's like, we can start doing this healing now, and it's never too late to do it either.
Yes, exactly. Yes, because language of listening works actually for every relationship. So your relationship with yourself. My husband's a therapist, and he will tell you that our marriage is better. And I talked about that a little bit at the beginning, right? Our marriage is better because of language of listening. And, a lot of it because I was able to heal, a lot of my wounds, a lot of those survival mechanisms that I brought into my adult life. But I love what you were saying too about the, that whole idea about boundaries and how we've kind of misunderstood them, and so like, and it's so true what you said. It's really about what we do. That's the part that we have control over is ourselves, right? And so, just for an example, there's so many ways that our childhood trauma. And so one of the ways that it shows up is just not being able to loud noises. Right. And so when our child is crying, it could be a baby, it could be a 3-year-old, whatever, when they're screaming and crying, that's really going to trigger, in a lot of cases, our nervous system. Right. And parents think that they just have to be patient and they just have to put up with it. When it's safe to leave your child when they're crying, it's okay. You're not abandoning them.
Right.
If you're overloaded, it's okay for you to go in the bathroom and say what you see and say that noise is too loud for you. Right. But what I always do is if my children are crying and I can't stay in the room, I always make sure I validate with them with say what you see. And I just say, it's really loud for me right now. This is where I'm going. If you need me, come and get me. Because if your child really does need you, if they really need the need for connection met, then they're going to come. Right. But it's okay for you if you just can't handle it in that moment. It's totally okay for you to hold a boundary, and your boundary is not stop crying right now. Right. Remember that phrase that a lot of parents, from today usually heard, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Right. This is not an appropriate way to treat somebody who's crying. you
Mm-hmm.
know, but we acknowledge how important this situation is for
Yes.
them. This is so important. That's why there's
Right.
tears, because this is really, really important, you know. And even for a baby, but for a baby, again, we don't want to leave a baby
Right.
crying, really. This is not ideal. But this is when we go, it's okay to ask
Yes.
for help. It's okay to ask my partner to come in. It's okay for me to call my mom and ask her to come over and hold the baby. It's okay. Maybe I need a babysitter for an hour every day
Yes.
to come and look after the baby, because it's okay for us to get our needs met.
Absolutely.
It's 100%
Yeah.
okay.
That's that
Yeah.
connection to the
And the other thing
piece.
I wanted to mention, oh,
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say creating our support system ahead of time is one of the main pillars that I work on with my clients is you cannot do it alone. Like
good.
we cannot do it all and it's impossible. So let's figure out who those ride or dies are in your life and what their role can be and how they can help you and really spell that out ahead of time. And then if there's gaps, we can work on that now so that you aren't feeling like you have to go through this alone because you can't. It's not going to be a
Yeah.
healthy way to be able to enter your motherhood, alone and without support. It's not going to be good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And oh gosh, the roofer showed up because some roof shingles. So I hope you guys aren't hearing the pounding up
It's
there.
fine.
Oh gosh. It's fun. Okay. The other thing I wanted to share was this, or to like maybe just kind of affirm is what you said. Like you can start now, even if you're expecting, even if you're in your, your journey of fertility. Like that journey of fertility is sometimes really hard to really
Mhm.
acknowledge for yourself, what's going on, what you want, what the strengths are, what you can
Right.
do. Like it's so empowering, right? Which is the name of
Yes.
this show, right? Right. It's so empowering when you choose from your deepest self, from your authentic self, from your identity, how you're going to move forward. It makes life so much easier, and it really, really increases your confidence that you can start talking to your
Yeah.
baby, right, in
Mhm.
utero already. And even when they're first born, you can be
Yes.
validating them. You can be using tons of say what you see. You can start naming strengths and looking for
Yes.
strengths, right? Like you're crying, you're hungry, that shows you, because this is the way that we use the strengths tool, by the way. I didn't really lay that out 100%. You always use say what you
No.
see first to give the proof, and then you name the strength. So like you're crying, you're letting mommy know, you're hungry. You're such a good
Mhm.
communicator. That shows that you're a good communicator, right? Start doing that with your
Yeah.
baby. Oh my goodness, it's going to be completely second nature for
Exactly.
you. And like, it's so easy because like, I mean, babies, they're crying and whatnot can be triggering, right? Waking up, all that stuff. But typically they're a lot less triggering than a
Right.
2-year-old,
Right.
right? And so being able to start that, before things start to feel triggering. And like the way that toddlers especially just eat up
Ooh,
that
yeah.
stuff. And I mean, maybe that's something that we can talk about a little bit more, Jessi, too, that just kind of popped into my head. When I work with moms who have a toddler and a new baby,
Mhm.
they almost always have the same issue,
Yeah.
which is the toddler starts hitting the baby,
Yeah.
right? The toddler, there's issues in that sibling relationship
Mhm.
already. So is that a good thing for us to chat about, do you
Yeah, we
think?
only have a few more minutes, but I think we can wrap up there because I think that that would be a really beneficial
Okay.
thing for us to touch on for our audience for sure.
Okay. Which is great, because I think, again, there's that triggering
Yes.
that happens as a mom. These situations start to feel like life or
Mhm.
death when the toddler's hitting the baby, and we freak out, and it's really hard to get to a place of
Right.
choice, to know what to do. So again, the validation with that toddler, because we want to talk about like where are they actually coming from.
Right.
And the toddler is actually coming from a place of their whole world just got turned upside
Yes.
down. Right. And they're just letting you know how hard it is. They're letting you
Mhm.
know how frustrated they are. Right. That's how frustrated you are. I
Right.
love those that's how phrases. That's how frustrated you are. You hit the baby. You wish you could have mommy all the time.
Yeah.
That's where you're coming from. Even just saying that time and time again, I've seen it, just that behavior just
Yeah.
stop with the toddlers.
Yeah.
And I've had moms really connect to that, even come into tears when they hear
Yeah.
me talking about this kind of validation, because I think it really allows us to accept ourselves.
Yep.
There's this back and forth where it really is true. I think that like we have to give it to ourselves to be
Yes.
able to give it to our
Yes.
children. But sometimes it's only the love that we have for our children that allows us to give it to them and not to
Mhm.
ourselves. But when we give it to them, then we're getting experience and learning how to give it
Yeah.
to ourselves too. So there's a really beautiful kind of back and forth relationship there, I think, when things are feeling
Yes,
tough.
I love that. It's very reciprocal in nature and it feels a lot of times we have to fall back on that motivation for our children because we've just been so ingrained to put our needs last, right? And so if you need to start there where your motivation is for your children, there's nothing wrong with that because I think over time you will build that, strength and that validation and that self-confidence that you deserve all these things too, right? And so it's like that
Yes.
muscle memory kind of concept with your neural pathways. You're reforging new neural pathways from things that were so ingrained before, previously. And so give yourself
Yes.
some grace. It's going to take time, right? You don't have to do it perfectly. That's my problem. I'm always like, I didn't do that
Yes.
perfectly, so I'm a failure, and then it's like, no, 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 take a step back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, perfectionism is one of the things that I talk about, of one of the survival mechanisms that show up from a difficult
Yes.
childhood is that
Oh, for
perfectionism.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this has been incredible. I am so, so happy that you were able to come on the show today and really share these amazing tools. I know I'm going to be applying them in my own parenthood. So this is wonderful. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your time, your expertise, and I'd love for you to share with our audience, if there's any newer expecting mamas out there or seasoned moms, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, yep. So my business is called Love the Way
Mhm.
You Parent. So if they get on Instagram or Facebook, or Google, and they type in Love the Way You Parent, they can find my
Perfect.
website, which is going to talk about how you can work with me, or they can binge some of my content, on social media, and yeah, for sure, feel free to do that. So yeah, Love the Way You Parent, and my website is just
Perfect.
lovethewayouparent.com. So
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
thank you so much
yeah,
again, Rose. This has been amazing. And, for
you're so
everybody
welcome.
listening, thank you for tuning in today. And remember that Empowering Postpartum Coaching guides new and pregnant moms through the transition into motherhood, so that you can bond with your baby without sacrificing your own self care. And if this is what you are wanting for your postpartum, shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'm at empowering_postpartum, and we can chat about how I can help support you through your own unique journey, because I think that that is so important. Each pregnancy, each postpartum is going to be unique. You're a new person each time you emerge through these phases of life, and you're learning and growing. And having that support is always so important, because you deserve that support, and so does your baby. And remember that this show can also be heard on the Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. And we are excited to be back again next week. You can tune in every Thursday live at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern. We always bring amazing guests, just like Rose here, to come